This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Hello, good morning. This is Jacob Rees-Mogg. I'm standing in for James O'Brien. So it's bad luck for all you lefty snowflakes out there today, because it's going to be a change of tone. And we're going to be asking, is this the Brexit you voted for? And we're waiting for your calls, texts and tweets to come in. Call on 0345 6060 973. Text on 84850 or tweet at LBC, because a lot's been going on about Brexit over the weekend. We had the summit on Thursday and Friday, which seemed to go quite well, but then stories in today's papers that might make some of us Brexiteers a little bit more nervous. The Daily Mail's reporting that there'll be no limit on EU migrants as long as they have a job, so we won't be controlling EU immigration if the Home Office has its way, in a similar way to the controls we place on countries outside the European Union. So this could remain almost unlimited EU migration if this is correct. The Sun reports that the Cabinet can't agree on the trade approach because it's so sensitive, and that the Ramonas are desperate to keep us tied into the single market and the customs union, whereas the people who back Brexit want us to get the advantages of Brexit. And then the arch Ramonas, the CBI, or as they like to be called, the EU-funded CBI, has come out this morning to say that they want no change in our trade terms for a transition period. And the risk of that, of course, is that it means we don't get the benefits of Brexit. What I want to see happen is, out of the customs union, cutting duties on food, clothing and footwear, because these three things are a disproportionate amount of the budgets of the poorest people in society. They're not going to affect the CBI leaders, but they do affect a lot of people in this country on limited incomes, and that those prices are all higher because of the tariffs we apply in the EU customs union. And what seems to be happening at the moment is that we've got people putting the producer first, putting the interests of everybody ahead of the consumer. And what we need is to help the consumer to ensure that we get the benefits of Brexit, but also the economic benefits that you get when you free up people's disposable income and make sure that they are able to spend on other areas of consumption beyond the necessities, but also they've got more money to save, which can be invested and can go into banks and can be recirculated around the system. And what seems to be happening with the constant talk of transition is that this will be delayed and that we won't get the benefits that we need and will be transformative for our economy until 2021 at the earliest, rather than having it in 2019, and therefore losing 2 years of economic opportunity. So what I'm hoping people will call in on is their view of Brexit, whether they think what I'm saying is right or wrong, whether they feel that we ought to roll back on Brexit and have an endless transition because they feel more secure with that, or whether there are people out there like me who feel we've got to go for it. This is what people voted for. And they voted for because they saw the opportunity of it, not because they were negative and not because they were little Englanders, but because they saw that Britain could be a really global nation, looking much beyond the narrow European sphere of a failing economic model to China and India and the rest of the world, and see those real opportunities that the country ought to be able to take. So we've got a call, and is this going to be Charlotte from the Forest of Dean? I think it is. Is that Charlotte?
It is. Good morning, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Good morning.
I'm just ringing to say that as far as I'm concerned, and I am a leaver, I'm a passionate Brexiteer like yourself, and I feel that we have been let down over this. I don't feel that there should be a transitional period because, in my view, out means out. We shouldn't be paying the EU any money, and we shouldn't be allowing low-skilled immigrant workers into this country after the Brexit, after we've Brexited.
Yeah, when you say we shouldn't pay them any money, do you mean nothing at all? Because that, legally we don't have to.
No, exactly. We shouldn't be paying them any money at all, yet the papers are full of, contradictory statements saying that Mrs May is going to pay them something, and I don't think we owe them a damn thing, to be honest with you.
And of course it's your money, isn't it? It's taxpayers' money. It's not that the government has all this money that it can splash about. It's hard-earned money of the British taxpayer.
It is, and I resent my money being given to the European Union so that they can have their nice fat pensions and enjoy a rather nice lifestyle. We need this money for the people in this country, and we need to invest it in things like the NHS and in other ways in order to get our own people back into work.
And would you think it was worth paying any money if it got us a good trade deal out of the European Union?
It would depend on the deal. I think we have the upper hand. I just don't think that Mrs May is exploiting it enough. I don't see why we should have to pay money for a trade deal when we have other countries wanting to have trade deals with us. But it would honestly depend on how that was approached and what the terms of the deal were.
You're quite right. We don't pay other countries for trade deals. Usually countries want to have trade deals. But the EU is in real financial difficulties if we don't give them any money at all. That's, I think, the problem for them.
Exactly, but I think the EU is falling apart anyway.
Well, there are lots of
why
problems.
Would we be pumping money into? Why would we be pumping money into a dead duck? To be quite honest with you.
Well, I think that's a brilliant note to end on, the dead duck EU, because I've got Rickard from Woking who wants to come on. Rickard, I've got a feeling you don't agree with the wisdom of Charlotte.
Well, Mr. Rees-Mogg, I can't understand why somebody in your position should not be for an endless transition. I mean, you're a business investor, and the EU is a wonderful, clever system for investors. You can promote your interests through the Commission, because under the treaties, the Commission is beyond the control of politicians and the public, and it's only if the politicians pretty well agree immediately to any Commission proposal without any argument that they can do what they want. And because the Commission can always withdraw a proposal, if there are any amendments proposed, then they've got the last word. And I mean, your people in Brussels can shape policy proposals through lobbyists. You've got that car exhaust scenario. It's only the USA that found out that the various car manufacturers in Germany were ripping people off. That was EU legislation, probably brought in by pressure from the German car makers. So that went wrong. But if you've got the EU staff sworn to secrecy, which they are, and if they criticise the EU, they get sacked without pension, and you've got the euro, a great success, creating mass unemployment in the south of Europe, so you get cheap labour, absolutely essential for profit and your type of investment, and you've got to try and beat China. And with free capital movements, you can buy up assets anywhere without any restrictions, except perhaps in Denmark, where they've brought in something you can't buy a house in Denmark if you're not a Danish original. And, with the free movement of labour, you get cheap labour, and cheap labour means profits, and you're an investor.
Oh,
so
I see. So you think I should support the EU racket because it makes me money. Actually, it doesn't,
That's
because what the EU does is it supports lobbyists and it supports uncompetitive big businesses. But I've always been on the side of small businesses who find that the EU just gives them extra costs and makes them less efficient. And I also want to see high employment in our country and across Europe, and that leads to higher and better wages and a better standard of living for electors up and down the country. And so I very much like your approach to this question, but I'm on the other side of this because I trust democracy ahead of lobbyists and bureaucratic cabals.
Well, that is the problem. Of course, democracy is the problem. If the European Parliament were running everything as a proper parliament, then that would be a big danger because the people would actually have a big say. But at the moment, the Commission is in the driving seat. It's got the wheel. What anybody says, the Commission will win out in the end. And that's the brilliance of those treaties. All the treaties have got the Commission as the main operator.
Yep. Well, I think you're getting on the right lines there. When I saw your message come up that you thought it was good for business investors to be in the EU, I thought you were going to make a strong case for why the EU was so marvellous. And actually, it seems to me you've seen through it. You've seen the crooked ramp that it is.
Well, I can't agree with that. The EU is a wonderful system for investors, and they make a lot of money.
But not for the people.
Getting what they want.
But not for the people.
Not for the people, perhaps. But
don't you think we should put the people first?
No, not really. It's always worked for us in the past.
What, putting investors first? Putting lobbyists and inefficient businesses?
This arrangement has been going on for decades. It goes right back to 1942, when the German Minister of Investment and Policy put forward a wonderful scheme.
That's great. Thank you. We've got to go off to a few messages, so thank you very much for your call, but we're going to be back on this great subject very shortly. Well, welcome back. This is Jacob Rees-Mogg on LBC, and we've been discussing whether we're getting the Brexit that we've voted for. And Chris from Richmond, is that Richmond, Yorkshire, or Richmond, Surrey that you're calling from?
Richmond, Surrey. Good morning, Jacob.
Good morning.
I'm very disappointed with the government's attitude regarding EU citizens. My wife has been here 22 years, and because we lived abroad, she's now in a situation where she can't apply until after we leave the European Union. When my family's had difficult times, I had very bad depression 3 years ago, and I was literally suicidal, and I'm not lying when I say that. And it was a Hungarian mental health nurse or psychiatrist that helped me through things. I have a daughter who's autistic, and she was helped at school massively by a Spanish teaching system. Now, under the current government plans, those people, if they haven't been here 5 years, would not be given guaranteed settled status. How can you say that you're on the side of the people when you haven't voted in the House of Commons and given the chance to guarantee the right of those people to stay in this country, Jacob?
Well, during the Brexit campaign and subsequently, I've said that we should be generous to EU nationals who are currently living here because they came here legally, our law allowed them to come, and they've made a huge contribution to British society. I think we should be controlling future movement, not trying to make life difficult for people who have already come here under a system that we set up, who we should greatly admire, because it seems to me it's a really brave thing to do, to move halfway across a continent to a country where you don't speak the language for the hope of improving your livelihood and the livelihood of your family. And I think we should have put that much more strongly. So I broadly agree with you. On the vote in the House of Commons, that was a token Opposition Day debate. It wasn't going to change anything, so I just backed government policy at that point. But I hope that we will be clearer, and indeed Mrs May is now much clearer on the need to protect people who came here lawfully and are contributing to our society.
Well, I mean, I think just at the Opposition Day debate, you could have made it your opinion clear by voting with the opposition motion. I think the other point is, I don't think she's been completely clear. She's talking about people being here lawfully, but she was the only member of the cabinet that 15 months ago vetoed the idea of having a guarantee for EU citizens from effectively day one of Brexit. And the point is, this is putting people off, I believe, Jacob, coming into professions. I recruit auditors. I work for a pharmaceutical company. I recruit auditors. I need language speakers. It's hard enough to recruit as it is now. If the government wants to continue to send a message that these people aren't welcome, or it's going to make it more difficult for them to come, and we as employers are going to have to go through more paperwork, people won't apply, and people will end up having to set up offices and departments and teams in other parts of Europe.
Well, it is going to be a question of taking control of our borders, isn't it? That's what people voted for, and that it's only right that we should have proper controls so that we can decide on the numbers that we want to come. And the future position is, I think, much more straightforward.
Well, but what about you've been controlling non-EU immigration for a long, long time, but you haven't controlled it properly. The fact is,
well, I agree with that.
The fact is we have low unemployment. So in the Conservatives, on the one hand, like yourself, trumpet low unemployment. Isn't it great under the Conservatives? At the same time, he's saying, well, we don't need all these people coming to the country. Social care in the borough of Richmond upon Thames would collapse tomorrow, Jacob, if Europeans stopped coming. But it's a fact, as in most of London.
Well, the people who are here won't go, necessarily. They won't be any under obligation to. They'll remain very welcome in this country. And there are over 8 million people in this country who are economically inactive, of whom 2 million would like to get employment. So there is quite a lot of extra supply in this country without going abroad.
Yeah, but I think there's other fundamental reasons. The reason in London why many, particularly women, aren't working is because childcare is unaffordable. It costs £1,000 a month to send a child 3 days a week to childcare, as I found out, so it wasn't worth my wife going back to work. frankly, when we had 2 children. So it's not about there's other barriers which actually stop people going back to work. It's not the availability of jobs in certain parts of the country.
But as you know, the government's introducing 30 hours of free childcare, so I think people are aware of the issues with childcare, and policy initiatives are in place to help with that.
But Jacob, I disagree, because my friends run a nursery, and even that policy has been flawed, because all that's done is say, right, we've got to give 30 hours free childcare to 3- and 4-year-olds, but what are they doing? They're then ramping up the charges on 2-year-olds to make a profit, because they can't charge for extra services.
Well, we're wandering a bit away from Europe, so thank you very much. I might move on from Craig from Devizes, so that's Wiltshire, next door to Somerset, so a very good county, not of course as great a county as Somerset, but Craig, you're very welcome. If Craig is there. Hello.
Hi, Jacob. Are you talking to me?
I am. Craig from Lincoln. You've moved. It said Devizes.
From Lincoln, yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic to talk to you.
Thank you.
It's good for you to be on the radio for this 3 hours rather than me having to punch myself in the face like I normally have to do. I can't see why this is so difficult, this transition. The 3 questions, for instance, EU citizens' rights. We ought to give them, all the people that are legally here, we give them the same rights as UK citizens enjoy. So not the same rights they've currently got with the European Court of Justice, just the same rights as UK citizens will have, because that's fair, surely. The question of the Irish border, we should just say to the EU, we're not going to put a hard border there. If they say one has to be there, then they can fund it, they can put one there. And I think the Irish will reject that, and they might end up having a referendum to leave the EU as well. On the divorce bill, we ought to pay them nothing, because our assets will offset the commitments that we've got. And lastly, the trade deal is all we have to say to them is, OK, you decide the tariff. However, it will be a universal tariff. So if you decide it's 10%, fine. We'd make an extra 6 billion quid a year out of that, plus the 10 billion we're not paying them. That's 16 billion. If they decide, actually, we need to have a free trade deal because we make a surplus on the UK, we're obviously, the UK are in deficit to the EU on trade, then that's fine as well, because that's the position we're currently in. But we'd be 10 billion a year better off that we're not paying the EU to have what they call a free trade deal. How is it free if you're paying 10 billion a year to have the deal? That doesn't sound free to me. When people say our fruit and vegetables will go up in price, they won't.
They won't. They should come down. Do you know, we have tariffs on oranges, which we don't grow in this country, to protect the Spanish orange growers, and that makes oranges more expensive for UK consumers.
Grapes similarly as well. Strawberries, if you take from Zimbabwe and Kenya and places like that as well, all our fruit and veg would actually come down in price, because we wouldn't have to pay tariffs to the rest of the world, because we could do free trade deals with them as well.
I agree.
The only reason, I just can't understand why our government just don't, if they actually came out and said that out loud to the people, then they're saying, actually, the only blockers are the EU. There are no blockers in the UK. All these 3 things we've satisfied. And as for regards to the trade deal, we're saying we want a trade deal. You decide the tariff. However, it will be a universal tariff where we pay the same for cars as we pay for fruit and vegetables. I'm
in entire agreement with you. If anyone disagrees, will they call 0345 6060 973? And in the meantime, I'm going to Chris from Wilmslow. Hello, Chris.
Oh, hello, Jacob. Can
Hello.
you hear me? Hi. Yeah, I'm completely with you. So I'm not going to sort of dwell on too much detail. I think really there's going to be winners and losers in this whole situation of Brexit. Everybody knows that. I think we should just go for it. But my question to you is, how do we precipitate a fast track to this Brexit resolution? I mean, it seems that we're just fluffing around. We're kind of moving in a situation which is not going in any clear direction. We continue to make all the running with this, and I just think we're going in the wrong direction. I think we should play hardball and accept that there's going to be some outcomes which some people, will benefit. Some fisheries and farmers and that. Other charities, for example, may be under pressure because it's from direct EU funding unless the government step in. And
so when you play hardball, what do you mean? Say we're not giving you any money and we're just going to leave and trade with you after the 29th of March 2019?
Well, that's exactly right, because what that will do is precipitate some consideration on the EU side to think about what they can do to retain their position in terms of the trade. We all know about that sort of detail. So, I don't think we're putting ourselves in a strong position by making all these, making the running. I just think we should say no, we are leaving, no payments, no exceptions, and then maybe close the deal later on if it suits us when they come back to us, and if they don't, we just go our own way, and that's it.
Well, I think that's great. I think you put your finger on it, and I'm now going to go to Owen from Budapest. I knew that LBC's reach was international, so I'm very impressed that we've got a caller from Budapest. Owen, over to you.
Good morning, Mr. Rees-Mogg. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you.
I'm a British expat here in Budapest, Hungary, and I've been following the Brexit developments quite closely. I personally voted to leave. I thought it was a sovereignty an issue that I thought was very important. Seeing Mrs. May's performance recently has been quite disheartening, because it seems to me that she's given unilaterally handed indefinite leave to remain, or she's allowing all of the EU nationals, 3 million of them in the UK, to stay, to work, to claim all of the benefits and the healthcare and the education that is available to the British citizens. And there's been no such guarantee for us who live in the EU. I think I heard that Spain has decided that it's going to allow its British expats to stay, but that was the Spanish government. I've heard nothing from the EU. They seem to have been given everything that they wanted, and they've given absolutely nothing in return.
But it's mainly a national responsibility, isn't it, immigration? So wouldn't you have thought that Hungary would welcome you, that Hungary is a country that wants the money, wants the taxes that you pay, and that the self-interest of the individual member states will mean that British nationals living abroad are almost certain to get a good deal?
In my case, that is exactly right. I've been in contact with the Hungarian Interior Ministry, and they assured me that my position here is secure. But again, I think it is being dealt with by the member states. But I've got friends in Germany. They haven't heard anything from the Interior Ministries there, and they're reading The Guardian, they're reading The Times, and all they hear about is people being used as bargaining chips. And I think the media is being very irresponsible in doing that.
Okay, well, I think that's a very good point. Thank you very much for ringing from overseas. I hope it hasn't cost too much on the telephone lines. But this is LBC with me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. The time is 10:30 and 13 seconds. Well, welcome back. It's 10:35, and this is Jacob Rees-Mogg in the LBC studios, waiting for calls. We've got lots coming in, but if anyone disagrees, do get through, because there'll be a hotline for you. It seems to me that the great wisdom of the British people is such that everyone's in agreement today, but it's 0345 6060 973. And we're discussing what's been going on in Brexit, the negotiations that went on Thursday and Friday, the news in today's papers about things that may be being watered down. But I wonder if anyone's got any views about the leaks in the German papers, about the disobliging comments apparently made by the President of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, about our wonderful Prime Minister, and saying that she doesn't trust anybody, but then why should she trust him? I can't think. But I'm very glad to welcome one of Mrs. May's constituents, Beverly from Maidenhead. Are you going to come on and speak up for our great Prime Minister and say that Monsieur Juncker is really a bit rude and should be politer?
No.
You didn't have to say that. I know you want to say something else, but I thought as she's your Member of Parliament, you might want to put in a word for her.
No, not really, I'm afraid. I started off by being impressed, but everything seems to be sort of going all over the place at the moment. And I'm a keen Brexiteer like yourself. I'm UKIP's secretary of the Berkshire County Committee, and I just want to make a point about the EU and trade, which isn't often made. Most of the businesses in this country are small and medium-sized businesses. And whilst Remainers go on about the importance of the EU because it's a market of 500 million customers, small and medium-sized businesses don't want or need 500 million customers. If you've got a specialised product or service, then most of those people may not be your customers. For example, if you manufacture wheelchairs, your customers will be people who need a wheelchair. And most of the 500 million people in the EU don't need a wheelchair and so won't be your customers.
That's such a good point. And 87% of our economy does not involve trade with the European Union, but 100% of our business is regulated by the European Union. And so we have all this unnecessary regulation for a relatively small part of our economic activity.
Absolutely. And it's perfectly possible to have a micro business which you run from your own home and yet trade with countries throughout the whole world. I've got a friend who runs such a business, and when I asked her how Brexit would affect her business, she really had to think for a while before she could come up with anything. And in the end, she said, well, postage might go up a bit. And that was all she could think of.
Yeah, so it's a lot of regulation for very little benefit. Most companies aren't involved, and people like the CBI speak out for big business who benefit from regulation because it keeps competition down. It makes it harder for new firms to get up and running. Thank you so much. That's a really helpful point. I'm now going to move on to George from Maida Vale, because he thinks we do have some budget commitments that we've got to honour. So, George, over to you.
Well, good morning, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Good morning.
We voted for the last round of budget commitments that take us to 2020. We were part of that. We agreed to it and we voted for it. We should follow up on that. It's part of the great British tradition to keep your promises and to honour what you said you would do, and I think we need to follow that through. A caller earlier was saying it would be a disgrace to pay for pensions. But why would it be a disgrace if we have been part of the organisation that employed those people and offered them pensions? Why on earth should we not pay for those pensions? If you had a company in this country who decided that they were not going to pay for the pensions of their current employees, that we'd soon have a phone-in about employees complaining how unreasonable that organisation or company is for not honouring its commitments.
Because the European Union has legal personality, and its liabilities are the liabilities of the European Union. And the position in international law was set out by an excellent House of Lords report, which said if we left without a deal, so this is leaving after 2 years under Article 50, we have no claim on the assets of the European Union, but they have no claim for the liabilities of the European Union. And I think it's in the event of no deal that we wouldn't pay anything at all. Do you think that's reasonable, or would you feel we should still pay even if we had no deal?
I would hope in the event of no deal that we would continue on our existing membership till we had a deal. Not many people seem to be considering that as an option. Actually, no, I don't, because I still think there is regardless of what the wise people of the House of Lords might think, I think there is still a requirement that you honour your promises. I don't think we should be perfidious Albion and walk away from our commitments and our promises. May I ask you a question, Mr. Rees-Mogg?
Of course, that's why I'm here.
Was there prior to the referendum, was there no consideration there might be a vote to leave? Was there no planning for that? Because it certainly looks like the government prior to the election, and actually for quite a few months afterwards, had no plans or no commitments to what might happen if Britain voted to leave. It seems to me they made absolutely no preparation for this outcome at all.
I'm sorry to say that I think you're right. I was on the Treasury Select Committee at the time, and we had senior mandarins in and asked them if they were making any preparations, and they said no, that the government had, as a matter of policy, decided not to make any preparations. I think they thought that if they admitted they were preparing for a leave vote, it would have boosted the leave vote, and that they were so obsessed by their own propaganda that they were very irresponsible in their approach to government. And it was a political decision rather than a civil service decision. I don't think on this occasion one can blame the civil service. But I agree with you, it was a mistake.
But the blame then would land with Mr. Cameron and Mr. Osborne in the Cabinet, who didn't ask them to prepare. In fact, it sounds like you're saying they specifically asked them not.
No, they specifically told them not to.
That's extraordinary. I mean, because that was although at the time we all thought we would vote to remain, and all the polls pointed in that direction, there was still, of course, the possibility that might happen, and not to prepare for that option. It was extraordinary.
As it happens, I was convinced we'd vote to leave, but that's because I did a lot of campaigning outside London where there was a very different feel. But I wasn't in a position to influence whether or not the government made any preparations. And I agree with you. I think it was deeply irresponsible, and it was done as part of the Project Fear to say that if we vote to leave, there's nothing in place. Anyway, thank you very much for calling. I'm now going to go to Tony and East Finchley, because you think Brexiteers are lying and the organisations are decent. So far away.
Well, that's not what I said. What I wanted to know was, you said at the start of your speech, the EU funded CBI.
Yes.
Why did you say that?
Because it gets money from the EU for surveys that it carries out for them, and it's in their accounts.
Less than 1%, isn't it?
It's in their accounts that they get money from the EU, and you don't get money from the EU unless you sign up to a contract saying that you won't do anything that damages the reputation of the EU. So the CBI...
Isn't true. You get less than 1%. 1% comes from the EU.
They get money from the EU. It's what I've said is correct.
How much money? It's less than 1%.
Well, it's part of their funding. It's part of their funding.
The funding is research. It's for research. It's ring-fenced.
Great.
0.6%.
So thank you. So you've proved the point that the CBI gets money from the EU.
Yeah. Would you call any other organisation?
I'd happily say it about any other organisation that gets money from the EU. It's an important part of their work. And they're constantly pro.
1%.
They're constantly pro the EU. The CBI told us we had to join the euro. They were in favour of the exchange rate mechanism. They're a very good counter-indicator of what the best policy is. If the CBI says it, it's almost always wrong.
EU funded CBI.
That's what I said, and I said again.
Yes. But it's not really. You wouldn't call any other organisation...
Yes, I would.
They're funded by, when it's less than 1%.
They are funded by the EU.
Much more.
I didn't say they were fully funded by the EU, but thank you. I'm very grateful that you've made it clear to all the listeners on LBC that the CBI is funded by the EU. Extremely grateful. Thank you very much. This is LBC with me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. The time is 10:45. Hello, welcome back. It's 11 minutes to 11, and we've been talking about the European Union and Brexit and all that goes with that. Later on, we've got other things to talk about, including Boris Johnson's speech and the punishment of people with old cars coming into London. But I'm glad to say we've got a caller from one of the finest towns in the whole of the country, one in my own constituency, in glorious Somerset. Dan from Midsummer Norton, you want to know if MPs are representing constituents, so... Tell me, because I'm your Member of Parliament.
That's very kind. Yeah, that's right. I'm calling from Somerset, from Midsummer Norton. What I actually wanted to talk to you about, Jacob, was how difficult it is to represent constituents in such a broad and complicated subject as Brexit. Obviously, we had a referendum which is a yes or a no, but there are so many facets and issues to be involved in Brexit. So I wanted to ask you, how does one go about representing constituents on something so complicated?
I think you put forward your views at the general election and, of course, in between times, and then voters decide whether they want the views in the round that you have or they want the views of the other person. I think with Brexit, it may be of such an important level to people that it determines how they vote. But mostly, I think voters are saying, well, I agree with the Conservatives on this, and I agree with Labour on that, and conceivably the Lib Dems on something else. And they weigh it all up and decide which one they agree with most. And as a Member of Parliament, you have to recognise that not everybody who's voted for you will agree with you on everything. And some people who didn't vote for you will agree with you on some things. And I think you've just got to weigh it up, and ultimately the voters decide.
Right. I suppose you'd agree that to weigh things up honestly and to be sort of true to your voters, you have to stay in close contact with them, right? That's what MPs have to do. They have to sort of immerse themselves in their constituencies and such.
I think that's very important. Okay.
Would you mind if I asked you one question as a sort of a litmus test about how you fit in with your constituents?
Well, I've grown up in Somerset. I was actually christened in the church in Midsummer Norton, so I've been around North East Somerset all my life, and I get views from my constituents the whole time via email and so on. But this is a conversation about Brexit, so I think we'd better stick to the subject. But thank you very much for calling in. We've got John from Derby who wants to know what the will of the people means.
Yes, hello, Jacob. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I remember you saying this at some point in the question time debate where you were talking. You said that Brexit was the will of the people have voted for Brexit, and I'd just like you to elaborate a little bit on what the will of the people means in your eyes, and then I'll give you my opinion.
Well, we had the largest ever vote in this country on Brexit. 17.4 million people voted in favour.
Which was a non-binding referendum, which was advisory, which carried as much legal weight to carry out a mandate as a survey would. So that's not...
No, that's a fatuous point, actually, that it was legislated for specifically, and the government made it absolutely clear in the course of the legislation that the result would be binding upon the government.
There were many things said in the run-up to it that it was not going to be binding. In addition to that,
I don't think that's right. I think everybody said they would accept the result of the referendum.
People did say that, however, a number of...
So you think politicians should have lied? That's what you're really calling for?
Well, you lie a lot, if I'm honest with you.
Oh, do I? When?
Yes. Well, I can't come up with a specific one.
Oh, that's very good. So you accuse people of lying without a specific example, and you think politicians, as a general rule, should lie and say that they accept the result of a referendum, and then, because you don't like the result, not follow it through. Is that your position, sir?
My position is, all right, one example. You believe immigration to be a bad thing, don't you?
No, I've never said that. I think it should be controlled.
Yeah, well, by every measure, mass immigration in all forms, according to studies by London School of Economics and Bank of England and many other organisations have shown it to be a massive benefit to our economy.
Well, there are very mixed surveys on that, actually. Some show it has some marginal economic benefits, some show it has a marginal economic disadvantage, and that its biggest impact is on the wages of the poorest in society. So you can read it in many different ways.
The person who wrote that report, which said there was a 2% potential 2% decrease in wages in some areas, he himself said that was not a reason to cut immigration policy because it's a marginal thing. And is it worth risking our nation's economy on such a marginal benefit? What benefits do you actually see a person like me who works a 40-hour week for just over minimum wage? What am I going to get from Brexit?
The benefit will be that if we come out of the customs union completely and we take tariffs off food, clothing and footwear, that the cost of living for people on moderate wages will be significantly reduced. It's a really important advantage.
Okay, assuming we come out of the customs union, which at this point looks most likely to happen through a no-deal Brexit. How many trade deals will we lose access to? We'll obviously lose access to 28 nations.
Our biggest
nations which we have access to through the EU.
Our biggest trading partner is the United States, with whom we don't have a trade deal.
And we just imposed massive tariffs on our aircraft.
Tariffs on individual items are quite commonplace in global trade, but they are still our biggest trading partner, and we have a huge surplus with the EU.
600,000 people, 600 million people. We would have the weight to fight these tariffs. We are leaving the European Union. We are losing the power to have power over 600 million people there.
We don't have power over 600 million people. We have
the power to influence 600 million people.
Very unsuccessfully. Thank you very much. I'm so glad we've had somebody who called in who doesn't agree. But I want now to go to Peter, who's calling from China, which I think is very impressive. As I said, LBC has a global reach. It's gone to the continent of Europe, to Hungary, and now it's gone all the way to the far, far east. So, Peter in China.
Hello, yeah, it's the highlight of my day listening to LBC, actually. And thank you today for me not having to turn off during this particular session.
Okay.
But anyway, that's another matter. The thing that nobody seems to talk about during these so-called negotiations is the huge collateral that the UK holds in the UK, in the EU, in properties, banks, ventures and everything all across Europe. That the UK has helped to fund and establish and purchase all of these years. And whilst we have people like your last caller who just seem to be going over and over again trying to refight the referendum, this whole topic seems to be lost. It's almost a topic that dare not speak its name.
Well, we've been a net contributor for a long time, and I had a wonderful message come in, actually, that said, Jacob, if a country who have always been a net beneficiary of EU money left, would the EU have to keep paying them? Of course not. So why do we have to do the reverse? That was from Steve earlier in the hour, and I think it's a terrific point, and you're making the same one. Anyway, thank you very much for calling. Really pleased to have had a call from China, and glad that you listened to the programme. I'm now going to go to David at Cheltenham, where I was just a week ago doing the literary festival with the splendid Jess Phillips, who is a model socialist MP, though she might not like me calling her a socialist. Anyway, David.
Hello, Jacob. Sorry to. Well, my main reason for phoning is I think the main problem with the Brexit deal is homegrown. I think ever since the referendum was voted on, that people started, like the likes of Anna Soubry, etc. But subsequently, they have got together as a cabal, and everything which is done in this country at the moment seems to be against joining the European Union, with leaving the European Union, and with the number of MPs in Parliament who seem to be pulling together to stop every which way move to get out of the European Union. What does it do to the European Union? Only seems to empower them, which would be an obvious answer to all the anti-Brexit in this country.
Well, they'll have to answer to their voters in the end, won't they? And this is difficult, particularly for the Labour Party, because a lot of Labour voters were strongly in favour of Brexit, and if their MPs try and gum it up, I think they'll get their comeuppance at the next general election.
But when will the next general election be? And the problem is, as you said, with the Labour, I mean, they went into this last election being very positively against staying in the European Union, and now they've done a complete U-turn over the last few months. Yep. And now they're going to put forward this motion for a final vote on the outcome of the talks, and to which it appears that they could put a complete block on it.
I don't think that will work, but thank you very much for your call. That this is LBC with Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we have been discussing Brexit for the past hour, and now we're going to start talking about the T charge, this extra charge that's being imposed in London on motorists driving cars that are more than 11 years old, built before 2006. And the issue there is that there were lots of failures in public policy, that diesel was promoted and that congestion has got worse and worse. And what we're trying to find out is whether bureaucratic failures are being pushed on to the motorist. So the question is, are voters being punished for government failures on air pollution? Please call on 0345 6060 973.